folks. So we are jumping now into season 2 of The Tread. If you have not got through all the videos of season 1, please go back, watch those videos, support your vendors, go say hi to those vendors, go meet them at shows. I just want to make sure that we get that shout out there. So, season 2, we are kicking off here in July. Original goal here was to try and get a shark breeder here. It is technically the official Shark Week in the United States of America. Unfortunately, shark breeders are very busy. There's also like a total across the globe of, I believe, 5 to 8 captive bred shark breeders. So getting their time during a time slot where we can either record it or get them down or to talk becomes very complicated. So unfortunate part, I have to deliver that news right off the bat. We won't have some of that fun shark goodness that I was hoping for. So apologize on that part there. We were hoping, but with Schaumburg around the corner, we were hoping to try to, hopefully move or slide someone in here to kind of run the open forum here with me. Unfortunately, those things didn't come to fruition. So I'll be running this one solo. So it's just going to be, me, the audience, and every single thing that has been submitted here before the show. As it relates to kind of the industry. And when I say the industry, we're not talking just ball pythons. We're not just talking geckos, blood pythons, colubrids, tarantulas. We're talking about the industry as a whole. So reptiles, exotics, like I had posted up, had people, if they wanted to submit their questions ahead of time, have some of those collected kind of in an order here. We'll start kind of talking about them. Obviously, as an audience perspective, I hope that you kind of communicate, give your thoughts and feelings. If you've got questions, hot topic, button items that we want to start discussing here, definitely let's do that. And, you never know. I mean, as we get an audience here, maybe we'll end up pulling some other folks here into the live. But, again, this is season 2 of The Tread. We will get back to our, typical vendor interviews as we go, into episode 2 onward, as well as into some of the lives across some of the different shows as well. We'll be mobile this year. So right now it seems like people are kind of just kind of trickling in, kind of a little slow here. So I get it. I think everyone wants to go see those specific vendors. So totally respect that. I know that there's multiple people who have decided to slide into this time slot after we kind of claimed it, because originally there weren't a lot of folks doing Wednesdays around this time. Apparently it's become a real crowded time here now. But just kind of going down the list here, some of the things that were, submitted to me, after season 1, as well as kind of leading up here to season 2, kind of some different things that people, had some questions on, wanted some thoughts on, wanted to discuss. I think one of the real key ones here. So this was brought up and sent to me by Shane, Small Town Exotics, and I think it's something that's not really talked about to its fullest. And I think it also depends on what species of animal we're specifically talking about. So diversity breeding versus species and more specific breeding. So when we talk about, first, let's level the playing field here. When we're talking about diversity breeding, we're talking about, the diversity of a gene pool, the diversity of the genes on that allele or of that allele, that are out there. So think about the concept of there are lots of different tomatoes. They might look very, very similar, at the grocery store that you go grab, but they're not all technically the exact same tomato. There might be some slight, genetic differences, which then produces things like higher yields or whatnot. Take that same concept now, put that to things like, reptiles, tarantulas, especially when we start talking about things like reptiles, where we have, different morphs and lines and stuff. It becomes more about, how many, the diversity, of that stock, when we start talking about a morph and stuff, what does that mean, long-term from a health perspective? That's something I'll throw out there. I know our crowd's kind of small right now. Hopefully we get some more people who join in, but I think that is something, as we start to kind of go forward and we start to look at some things, we are going to start thinking about it. I think, some folks, we forget about it, but so I'll take a similar concept. So obviously dog breeding has been, recognized for a lot longer than I would say reptile breeding, as far as, the advancements where everything is at. If you take a species like the Great Dane, so right now, technically the Great Dane in Europe is being what they call genetically rebuilt. because the diversity in the gene pool of Great Danes became so small and so poor that they said that we technically, to a degree, have to rebuild that species, which is ridiculous when you think about it, from a purebred dog. But that's what happens because over time, over breeding, and then that's why you saw increases of issues within Great Danes. And if you look at the original Great Dane to the ones we see today, there's dramatic differences. I don't think we're to that point yet in reptiles and exotics as a whole, but I do think that that's something, especially as we talk about how the environment obviously in Africa is changing, how that's affecting availability of stock or different genes that are in the wild that we have not pulled in to be able to pull into captivity yet. As well as even if we start cutting off, let's say, the ability to do, imports and stuff with like ball pythons or other species, what does that mean for the diversity of the gene pool as far as what we do for breeding, and what do we have to start thinking about from a breeding project perspective to keep that diversity up? So one, obviously people can continue to learn about them, educate about them, and enjoy them as pets. Two, as breeders, we can continue to breed responsibly and creating not just a more genetically, visually appealing animal, but also a genetically stronger animal, I think becomes the other piece to it. So, I think that's a really, big topic. Like I said, I think is hopefully as more people kind of start trickling into chat. If you got any kind of thoughts on the topic and stuff, would love to hear them, throw them in the chat. Again, I really think that this is very similar for all species. And I think this also connects back into different concepts like, conservation, as far as, what we need to start thinking about across, different species of reptiles, inverts, as far as, what it's going to mean, not just for what we're breeding today, but what we're looking at breeding in 5 years, 10 years. Most people, unfortunately, as things get more commercialized, we stop thinking about that far ahead. The unfortunate part is obviously when a lot of folks who are breeders, their product is a living animal. It's not a dry good. It's a lot easier with a dry good to be okay if you don't look that far ahead and be able to hopefully adapt and shift. When you're talking about a living animal, that's something that you have to kind of actually think about a little bit more. What is that going to mean, in 5 years? What is that going to mean in 10 years? How do we need to adapt? So I think that, again, that's it's a hot button topic. I don't think that that's something that, again, is getting as much press as it should. And, I think we're going to end up running into a point, like I said, in this industry, and some folks it might not matter for, because they might either be retired or out by that point. But for when we look at the next generation, and so many reptile and exotics keepers, we talk about, oh, well, it's about the kids, the kids of the next generation to be able to bring things in. And I agree. That's all 100% right. But we have to start thinking then, are we setting them up for, full success, for that? What additional steps do we need to take to ensure that diversity across, the species, across the alleles stays, and we don't end up with such a small gene pool, or potentially in some genes, maybe a less stable or strength of gene pool to where it might be, right now, or where it was even 5 years ago. As we continue to advance, unfortunately, those are things, again, that, I think that needs to be thought about, needs to be discussed. And I think part of that also just depends on, I think where you want to go in the hobby. Are you looking to be, about, just producing, within a specific species or bloodline or something, that has different stipulations, I think, versus when you're talking about working with morphs and stuff, I think, and how you look at some of the diversity of breeding and how you bring in lines. When you talk about some of the really high end, red tail breeders and stuff, I mean, they'll, like, true red tail, BCC guys. I know when I was in those realms for a little bit, I mean, they talk, heavily about this, about how they select when they bring a new animal in, for, adding to their lines or diversity of their lines. It's very, it's very unique, I think in that perspective, that I can at least speak to. I think some folks on that side are very calculated, and I get that, because you're trying to drive, pure lines from a Guyana or Suriname perspective on down the list. But, definitely, be kind of curious, across some of the species, I would say I don't have as much contact with, what do people think, this means from a diversity of breeding perspective, from the gecko side, from hognose and other colubrids. What do people think about turtles and diversity? I mean, I think that's even something to throw out there. I mean, I don't. I mean, what's going on in turtle and tortoise land right now? I don't hear much chatter, from that group across the community. So I think that's even, intriguing to a degree as far as, what that means to that part of the hobby as well. So, feel free to throw those questions, comments in the chat. If you have any thoughts, have any feelings here. Kind of going, into kind of that same pool here. Another one that was kind of thrown out. I know when we had Will from TJW on the show, I mean, first season, he highlighted some of the things around, conservation. And this is a big thing. I think especially, I would say, well, it's important on the reptile side. I think even more so, I'll say from my perspective, as an invert breeder, I think on the invert side as well. Um, you know, I believe that, again, it's about getting those animals into, people's hands to be able to experience, enjoy, be able to work with, be able to have, potentially, obviously as a pet or a pet option, besides just from a, breeding and a collectible perspective. But then we start talking about things, like species awareness, and especially with, like I said, like the invert side with some of the really rare, spiders and tarantulas and scorpions and stuff. I really think that there is a balance with that. I was just speaking, to a real good friend of mine. I won't name them just because I don't want to throw them, into any fires. I'll take that on myself. But we were speaking. I do a lot of, kind of when I'm looking for new things or rare things for my collection. This is my go-to guy. And he was referencing, the hobby on the invert side has gotten so much to the point where so many people are caring about sales and the next hot trend and stuff, and everyone's jumping and jumping and jumping and trying to jump ahead to the next species, to this species, to try to, this and that, and I have to have, whatever. But it's great from a species awareness perspective, because more people are getting to see the species and be aware of it. But the question then becomes, how many people we don't do the same vetting process, I would say, that you see with, dogs and cats. I mean, even when you go adopt from a shelter, there's a more stringent vetting process than there is at, an expo or online or something like that. And I think it really becomes, obviously it becomes that responsibility as us as a vendor to make sure that we're, properly educating, especially on the invert side, upfront, as far as what those requirements are. Just because, I mean, some of these species are so rare, it's not like you can re-import them again. It's only what's, captive available or from that one import. And then it's up to us to hopefully try to keep producing those, especially as some of these habitats change and stuff in the wild, be able to have that. And that's why there's all those different tarantula conservation projects and stuff. So, I know for me, like one of my big things is, I try to, with that book, if people have come by my table on the Cyber Tees side, that book is that starting point for people to kind of get a baseline to spark that conversation. And then from there, that way people can feel comfortable, with that keeping piece. Cause again, I mean, especially like take things like Plesiotherma complex in tarantulas, we have conservation efforts because our concern is that there's so many that are endangered. Take any of the ones from Sri Lanka. They're all in danger. That's, there's not a lot out there. So the concern is obviously, what does that do once they're gone, in the wild? What does that mean for the ecosystem? So a lot of work on that side. And I think again, that's something if we want our kids to experience, our kids, our, great grandkids on down the list, again, I think as breeders and owners, I think it's looking at, how do we give back to conservation? I know Will mentioned, again, in that episode with TJW, some great ways to be able to work with some of those field herpers and biologists that's going to help, advance those places with conservation. I think also as well, like I said, it's driving the proper education and awareness around the species so that as people bring in new species, they're set up for success. I highlight this all the time. I mean, I'm a Nile monitor owner. You see so many Nile monitors that end up getting, rehomed or that don't make it to adulthood. And part of it is just, again, I think it goes back to that education piece. I think it has nothing to do with the species in captivity. I've seen multiple and been around multiple that have lived long adult lives and that are still thriving. And it's about educating, providing the proper information and making sure that those folks are going to be able to care for it, not just, in 1 year and 2 year, but in, that 5, 10, 15-year span. That goes for, a lot of these tarantulas. I mean, some of these tarantulas are, 30 plus year commitments. Ball pythons, 20, 25, 30-year commitment. So a lot of these reptiles, they're living longer than our average, dog or cat. And, again, that ties all the way back, when we start talking about things like this with exotics and stuff, as far as making sure that we have that balance from a conservation perspective, an education perspective, and a keeping perspective. So, again, I mean, throw your comments in the chats. What do you think that we as a herp community need to do to advance, conservation, that species awareness with keeping, and really balance that with obviously the business side, which has been growing, is budding, and I think it's great for the hobby because we're making things more readily available for folks to be able to interact with. But where do you think that balance is? Where do you think we've come up short? That we need to continue to grow, continue to be better at. Feel free to throw that in the chat. Give your thoughts, give your 2 cents there. I think again, seem to be real quiet tonight. No one really jumping on. So it's unfortunate, for a season 2 kickoff. I will say, hopefully folks and obviously everyone, continue to follow through, on your commitments and stuff. So folks, we'll keep treading on with this, but definitely obviously let's try to get that content in here. Yeah, Steve. Yeah. So today was our kickoff. We tried to throw it across a lot of different groups. We posted it across NARBC groups, been sharing it on social and stuff. Yeah, I just had a feeling this one, with us, the shark breeder stuff kind of being in limbo and not being able to nail it down ahead of time with the TBD. I think that really hurt us, as far as, being able to get that. And like I mentioned at the start, we had like 5 other podcasts that decided to slide into our time slot that used to be at other time slots that are in the reptiles and exotic space. So that kind of burnt us a bit. No, not 27th. We're on next week with Morphologics, 27th, Jason Amos, and then we're live at NARBC as well. So we've got two episodes, coming up right before the NARBC one with 2 NARBC breeders, and then from there, obviously the live on Friday during VIP at NARBC, and then moving forward all the way through October, August, September. October, probably be wrapping up after Tinley right before St. Louis, because that becomes my busy time because I got about back to back shows to kind of close out my year. So I'm going to bring up something. This has been something that's been brought up, customers. I see a lot of, folks who are, larger in the industry than me. I see folks at the same stage in the industry as in me. And I wanted to spend some time on this tonight. Like I said, I was hoping to have another guest so that maybe they can kind of give me their views, their insights, as far as if they know these terms, if they've seen these. But I mean, I'll be the first to say, by all means, mine are not perfectly perfected from a marketing and a sales funnel perspective. But I think understanding these concepts when we talk about, being a vendor, being a breeder, actually having animals for sale, these are really important steps. And folks, as you start to mature, or even if you are a mature brand, but you've never heard of this, I highly suggest starting to go and use this. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to share one of my screens just so I can kind of walk through the process for folks that maybe aren't familiar with this terminology here. Because I think that this is really important. So just kind of bringing it up here now. So, marketing and sales funnels. This is a very generic 7-step sales funnel. And I'm gonna take the banner down here just so we can get a little bit better. There we go. So marketing and sales funnels nowadays, I mean, this is what you hear. Some people use terms like pipeline. And by all means, you should have multiple pipelines when you're talking about, I'm a reptile or exotics breeder in business. How do I sell? You should be creating more scripted ones that are based on, your different ways that you're looking to obtain customers and hit a customer base. But I just want to break this down for folks who are not, used to or working within sales funnels so that they kind of understand, and maybe you can start using these concepts yourselves, especially this year. I know it's been really weird for a lot of folks, but this is still something I'm really big. I use it in my day job. This is something you should really use, as well in your exotics business. And this is a very clean, easy 7-step model. So that initial contact. So thinking about your customers at that first phase at the top of the funnel, that's your largest customer base at phase 1, at that initial contact. And it's not just saying this is the only way I'm going to connect and contact with my customers. This is where I talk about those multiple funnels. What are the different initial contact ways that you have to be able to build potential? Because that at stage 1 with that initial contact, that's all it is. It's potential. It's not a suspected buyer, probable buyer, or a buyer. It's just potential. But how do you gain that breadth of potential for your customers and for your business? So that's what initial contact is. So thinking as a business, what are ways I can drum that up? Whether that be social media, doing things like email campaigns from past customers, at reptile shows. Yeah, you can meet them in person and stuff, but what additional things can you do? Whether that be talking with other breeders at the show that then could potentially also be a customer, how you draw someone in at a show. How do you draw them to your table to then have the conversation so that they're in that initial contact phase? Because anything that happens before that, they're not a potential customer at that point. They're not within the scope. So that's something that you need to start looking at as far as how we're going to start driving that from a reptile business perspective. Then that second step, we go down to the qualification piece. So here we're starting to talk about, we have leads, things are actually starting to get serious about potentially we're getting customers to drive to a purchase point. So at this point, if you think about it from a reptile show perspective, the person's got into your booth. They're in front of your booth. There's been some at least initial shown interest or discussion, whether that be that they say that they're looking or they're thinking or they're pointing maybe at that gecko, at that snake, at that tortoise that's on your table at that time. That's where the qualification piece now comes, because they've made contact. They're now showing that qualification that they are potentially a suspected buyer. When we get to set that level 3 there down to develop solution, again, this is now going to be an even smaller piece as far as where our customers at in that journey. And it's basically trying to get those facts. So again, when they're at your table, when they're talking to you online, when they're messaging you on Morph Market or any other platform that you might be using, it's about what can you gain about them? It's getting that knowledge about them. So thinking about what is value to them. And the thing is, as a business, whether you breed geckos or colubrids, ball pythons, it doesn't matter. Your value proposition is one thing, and that's what you're saying that you're selling to your customers. But you need to understand what your customer's value is, because you need to be able to connect your value proposition to what they value. And those might be two very different things, but that does not mean that they're not your customer. So you need to figure out where you need to develop that solution, which is stage 3, to connect that and drive that value proposition as far as why your snake, why your gecko, why your tortoise fits their need, whether it be for a pet or a breeding project or whatever it may be. Going to that next piece, which is the presentation piece. At this piece, we're thinking specifically about, at this point, so they're looking at the snake, you've maybe taken the snake out or you've taken the gecko out, you're showing it to them. You're not just having them look at it in the display case, but you're actually having that hand-to-hand interaction. Think about it as a business. If someone says, hey, why should I buy your lawnmower? And you're selling to a commercial lawnmower, you want to demo the lawnmower. You want to see it. You want to test drive the car. That's what handing the reptile over is at the show. If it's virtual, if it's online, that version of demo might be something like showing them a video, of that animal to show everything's good, showing them, multiple pictures, multiple views, pictures of the parents, pictures of mama on eggs, those types of things. Those are the pieces of presentation when we talk about, from a reptile industry perspective. How do I now bring it as I've shown and got that initial contact that they're talking to me. I've now qualified that they're interested in potentially what I have. I've now drawn the value proposition to what they value and what my values are and how I solve that. I give them that solution. The presentation is now showing that to them, giving them that personal connection to it. And now we're going into step 5, where then at that point, from a reptile business perspective, we're saying, how am I going to address your concerns? This is at step 5. And, I don't know if Wally is on here from Spring Gecko, but I'm going to steal your line. He always says, what questions can I answer? What further questions can I answer for you about this product? And that's what that evaluation piece is. It's addressing the concerns, ensuring that if that customer has questions, how do you address it and turn those concerns into a net positive? That's another key piece to business. Is people always say that concerns or risk is what people are afraid of. That's false. Concerns are actually the ability to upsell a customer, a potential breeder, a potential buyer. So that's part of where that evaluation process becomes very, very calculated. So think about these things as you're going into a show, as well as when you're preparing to start selling online, if you haven't already. That evaluation process, 9 times out of 10, that's where a lot of times that holdup is. A lot of folks don't get to step 6 or 7. They get stuck at 5, or they don't know how to go past 4 or 5 to get to 6 and 7. So how you work with that evaluation to address concerns and pull those concerns out of your customer is the difference between a sale and someone who goes to the next table and the next table and then comes back at the end of the show to show you that they bought from somebody else. So think about that evaluation cycle and ask, how am I addressing my customers' concerns? How am I getting those concerns from my customers to be able to get those answers? Then going to the negotiation piece. I think this is one thing that most folks all have their different style in the reptile community as far as how they want to negotiate things like price or deals and other details. I think that one's pretty straightforward. I think the key, like I said, is getting from evaluation to where you can start talking about the dollar piece. And sometimes 5 and 6 can actually go hand in hand, because 9 times out of 10, a lot of times that concern or that hold up something is the customer's perceived value as it relates to price and your perceived negotiation or value that you've pitched to them based on the price that you're giving them. So drawing out why that is, where they're at, and how they're feeling about something is the difference then as far as closing out step 5, closing out step 6, and getting all the way to step 7 there, where you've closed, you've made that deal, that person has taken that new reptile or invert to their home, and you've now gained a customer. And now that cycle starts all over again. Because if you want them to continue to then be a customer later, you need to make sure that there's another contact, that there's a contact loop. Because just because they bought from you before, there's still the potential that they might make that initial contact later. But being proactive to start that secondary contact loop, to restart that funnel again for that customer, that's the key. That's the key between getting a bunch of single customers and getting a consistent pipeline of customers. Another way that we can actually look at this, and I'll stop sharing this one here. I'm going to go share another example. It's another way to look at this. So again, this is another way we call it a purchasing funnel. More simplistic way. If the 7 steps is too much for you to kind of break down, think about it this way, in 4 easy steps. How do I drive awareness to my customers? And that awareness is what's going to make my base. as far as who all potential customers are. How do I drive interest? So awareness, they are aware of your brand and your product. When I get to an interest level, I'm connecting them from they know you sell snakes or they know you sell geckos to they are interested in this gecko. They are interested in this type of snake. They are interested in this morph or something in this price range. And they're now a suspected buyer. And then it's driving them to a point where they're not just interested in acquiring it, but they have that desire to want it. And that's when at that point you basically have your prospects. Those are those folks that are usually at that prospects fight. They're usually in the 1 to 3 month buying term. Once you get to an actionable piece, that's a customer. Actionable customers are a very small percentage when they walk into a reptile show, and people don't realize that. Most of your customers, they're actually looking at are actually not going to be customers today. They're actually prospects, suspects, or market potential. So starting to key that in and think about after every show that you have or every interaction, if you're online in forums, Discord about reptiles, how many of the interactions you had today and where did they fall? Because again, that actionable, those are the customers that are looking to buy now. And that's a very small percentage, but really you shouldn't be just focusing on the customers who want to buy now. A lot of your energy actually has to be focused on those other 3 levels of the purchasing funnel. So it's all about the awareness, the interest, and the desire. If you don't consistently have those pieces growing, those pieces driving, your actionable group is actually super, super small because they never had the awareness that you ever existed. Those other 3 stages is to make sure that your actionable group is always flowing in new customers. So that's the key when you start thinking about how do I continue to keep building a consistency in my customer base. So when you're looking to vend, like I said, I wanted to bring this up because I can't tell you how many customers I've had this year that are looking to vend, looking to breed. They're not understanding these concepts, and I felt like this was something kind of going to the kickoff. I wish there was another breeder I was able to bring on here to kind of have that conversation. But that was a big thing for me. I think the more that folks start to map these out and what this means for their brand or how their brand positions in their funnels and creating their different purchasing, sales, and marketing funnels, I really think it makes a big difference. Just in the past, 60 days, I've been making adjustments to my funnels and the way that I look at, sales and purchasing and stuff. And some have been positive, some have been, not had the results, and that's part of it. It's testing and fine tuning, and you're going to have to shift and adjust those funnels as the market changes as well. So what worked in 2022 is not going to work in 2023. So thinking about how you can dynamically change those funnels and perspectives, that's what keeps your brand fresh. That's what keeps your stock fresh. That's what keeps you, from a breeder perspective, in a sense, not being quote unquote, stale, as they say, so again, something to start thinking about, start mapping out with your business. Doing that into the second half here, of calendar year 23 or the start of fiscal year 24 here now. So I know that was probably the most boring thing that's already been brought up here today. Not exciting for most folks. Apologize, if they're not excited about that. Again, if there's certain topics, hot button items that you want to address, definitely feel free to throw those into the chat. But like I said, I'm going through some of the ones that were brought up, sent to me before the show, as far as things to address, things that they wanted to have that open forum discussion about. That was a big thing, was that piece of it. A lot of folks have been asking about that. So wanted to make sure that content was out there for those folks, whether they, join live here or watch later. And then this way as well, I have something to point back to when folks are asking about that, because it's not a concept really talked about too much in the reptile community yet. Hey, Steve. So Steve's saying, I definitely need to work on my awareness. I really let it slide this year, lost some of that drive because I'm not creating as many animals this year to sell. Yeah. And that's something, with me, that first year or so when I was breeding, I didn't think obviously maybe, with shows or anything like that, but I really didn't think, and, that's one thing I always tell people, if I would have started my awareness And that's why you see some folks from a social media perspective that haven't even produced a clutch and they're so far ahead from a social perspective and a base perspective. It's because they're building that awareness before they've actually produced the product. And like I said, I'm at fault for that too. I was a big believer until I've actually, built it, done it, produced it, or if I'm not producing as much, that I don't need to drive that. But that's actually, false, connotation. It's the concept of continuing to keep driving people, back, to your company, even if there's nothing new, there's nothing, yet to come. So while it might seem repetitive, thinking about different ways to engage people, whether that's just, shooting a message back out to customers, checking in on them, seeing how they're doing, different ways as far as how you're posting your social content. Nothing wrong about that. It's just continuously to drive that, because when you have a ton of clutches on the ground and you've driven that awareness, even if you're the newer name, you're going to have thousands of people, hounding to try to get what you have because you've driven such a strong awareness. That's part of having a strong brand. So never feel shy about, doing that, whether you have 1,000 animals to sell or 0 animals to sell. Always drive that awareness. Your brand is there, whether it's in season or off season. So kind of jump to another piece here, after we kind of go to the marketing piece. This was brought up actually to me twice. So once before the show, and actually once this past weekend at the Fond du Lac show. And people are asking about this, and I think this is an interesting one. Self policing in the reptile community. So it's a tough one because I think, obviously I'm one of those people where I believe, there's two sides to every stories. And given we're in the age of social media, people like to utilize or weaponize things more than they need to be. So, but I do think, to a degree, I think where it can help is not to the point where name calling or, oh, this person that or this person that, but setting a standard. I think that most folks, I would say, to a degree, across different parts of the reptile and invert community, that there is a, kind of a spoken standard as far as, what's ethical and what's right. But I think, again, I think part of that self-policing is actually through education. The more we educate people who come into the community, the folks who have gotten in and chose not to do the ethical things or the right things as it relates to the betterment of the animal, the species, the growth of the hobby, or the conservation efforts, those will weed themselves out, I think. But because education is such a powerful tool to get folks in the right direction. I also think the other part is, as a community, I think we need to be more open as far as just being able to discuss things, not get combative, defensive. I think when you look at industries that have been very quick to advance, to be able to grow, where there are multiple market stakeholders like there are in the reptile community, part of that is having those open lines of communication. So I think that's going to be part of it. And then, like I said, I think, again, I really do believe that a lot of stuff with reptiles as it relates to quote unquote policing in the hobby, it starts with education. You educate people appropriately when they get into the hobby. You're not going to have those issues, and those other people will slowly weed out because there's not going to be purchasing power, brand power as it relates to those issues. Nothing's ever going to be perfect, and people need to realize that. I think we need to play the law of averages here, statistical averages. There is no 100% confidence rate. I think we have to, answer and say, as a community, what are our intervals of acceptance? So I think that's it starts with discussion, starts with being open, and then it, ultimately it's always going to be education that's going to drive it. Another one that was kind of thrown out there at me there. So, I mean, social media, a lot of folks have been poking and asking me, how much, the good, the bad, the how much piece I'm going to tell. I think that's really up to each person. obviously don't get, that's up to you. I do think it's a very powerful tool as it relates to pushing, the reptile agenda, as I want to say, as far as us being able to drive, different species out there, make it more normalized, as a, popular, pet keeper item, compared to your traditional, dog, cat, fish, type of a perspective. So I do think that there's a huge positive in that, and the strength of the numbers that we have driving it, becomes another huge piece. Uh, the good, the bad, the selling piece. I mean, yeah, obviously the bad. A lot of people know, obviously, major, social media platforms, as it relates to what you can and can't do on there, as it relates to live animal sales. So obviously, those things need to be, considered. From a selling perspective, though, I do think that while you can't maybe quote unquote directly sell on those social platforms, what you can do and have the opportunity to do is you're actually passively selling. It goes back to that marketing funnel again, and I hate to keep hounding people on this, but your social media is passively selling. It's passively selling your brand. It's passively selling your quality. It's passively selling you. It's linking people to you. It's linking potential customers. That's a way to gain your influence and your awareness, which then eventually leads to those actionable customers or those prospective customers. So that's really how I feel with it. I think that there's a lot of great things you could do now from an AI perspective, as well as just from an automation perspective, so that you can lighten your load. It doesn't have to be your all day. I hear some guys that say they spend 6, 7, 8 hours on social media, from a reptile breeding perspective, and that's great if that works for them. But I do think that, especially looking forward here into 2023, all the way into then 2024, with some of the advancements in AI, I really think a lot of the overall time that we spend on social media to be able to, drive that awareness, drive that brand strength, be able to show off what we have, what we've produced, is actually going to be less. It's going to be less. And it's just going to be the folks that are still spending large amounts of time on it are actually going to be, they're going to start falling behind as new different types of platforms and ways to be able to, drive those connections with customers come out. Just so thinking about, obviously, how can you progress, by utilizing, again, automation tools and AI around social media, I think is going to be a key driver second half of 2023 and into 2024. Again, folks, feel free to throw your comments, questions in the chat here. Otherwise, again, I'm just going off of what people have submitted, ahead of time, for the show. And just trying to give, kind of some open thoughts, feedback. Feel free to throw your comments, questions, thoughts, concerns in the chat as well. This was the last one that was kind of, that was brought up here. There were some other small ones too as well that we'll probably touch on here potentially, but this was the last major one that we were seeing a lot of trends with people asking about. So gene cycles, as far as how, trends, specifically, this is more towards, I think, a lot more of your ball python market. I get that, obviously, as a ball python breeder, I'm sure obviously you see this to a degree, as well. I do, from the boa perspective, and even some other things, that have morphs out there. You see trends, they become hot, then they die off, and then they're cool again once something new or hot or fresh has become. I think this really, again, connects back. I hate driving and connecting all of this back to all these different things, but this is a social media thing, I think, more so than it is anything about the gene. I mean, realistically, it's someone who has influential or influencer status that is basically driving the awareness about part or a gene, which is in a sense, quote unquote, a product in this perspective, that then helps elevate their brand because of their current breeding projects. So that's what it does. And then people obviously try to follow that trend because they're trying to follow an influencer who has strong, media impact as it relates to the industry. But when you start thinking about and calculating where things are at, 9 times out of 10, you should really kind of stay the course as far as your business objectives. So, again, I think, trends have their pros and cons, but I think, again, not falling into that trap, falling into that loophole of always chasing the trend, but instead trying to create that trend, create a trend for your customers, create that niche for your customers. I think that's the bigger thing. I tell people this all the time. I mean, when Under Armour came out, if we want to connect this back to brands, again, I feel like I'm hammering on branding, but again, this is a big thing. But when Under Armour came out, they chose to create a new product that created and filled a gap. And while from a breeding perspective with animals, you can say, well, I'm not really filling a gap. But realistically, you actually kind of are, because a lot of people look at this like living art. A lot of people say, I'm trying to find something else, trying to find something different. I need something that's darker. I need something that cleans the pattern. I need something that adds some type of enhancement or brightness. I need something that, affects the head stamp of the animal. I need something that gives me, a different physical appearance, whatever that may be specifically. You could follow the trend as far as where, the 75% is as far as looks, feel, or you can go and jump and say, people are asking for X, but no one's filling it, and figuring out what that is. You might be wrong the first time, the second time, the third time, but when you hit, goes back to that Under Armour story. When you hit, you become a market disruptor. You now have something that's different, and now the major brand, aka Nike in this instant, is now trying to copy you. So I think that's a big thing, again, with the reptile community as well, is trying to keep that originality so that you're creating your own trends for your customer sets. How you create those trends to drive your customer sets also becomes a big thing as well. Everyone's pipeline is different. There are some similarities, there's some overlap, but creating a trend that's unique to the customers that resonate with your brand, that's something that's huge for an organization, for a company, and even for a reptile breeder. That's why when you even see, ball python breeders, there's a ton of them. Let's just take that one out there. If you want to stand out, look at it very similar. Some of the top dogs, in the country that are bought, Labradors, German Shepherds. How do the top breeders stand out? Ask that same question. Go to them. Actually talk to them. I do. Ask them how they stand out. Or some of those boutique breeders that'll never be the biggest breeders, but they have some of the highest end stuff. How do they stand out? Why do they stand out? What do they do different? How do they create that trend that drives the consistent customer flow? And you'll start noticing things that they do. And I think that that's something very similar you can do, again, in the reptile industry, in the invert industry, in the exotic pet industry as a whole, that I think some breeders do a really, really good job of that, and they're very established, and you'll see that they're well-oiled machines, and they're already at that influencer status. But everyone who's not at that influencer status yet, I think that's the key. It's not just trying to copy what's already been done. A lot of those guys have given good blueprints, and you can take that blueprint, but you need to make that blueprint yours. Taking a standard and just keep copying it doesn't do anything. The standard or the blueprint is a starting point. So thinking about, when I talk about genes and trends and combos and how they become hot and cool, if I'm building something that connects back to the customer base that I've defined, that my brand resonates with, you're always going to be in trend. So I think that becomes really a big thing. It's not thinking about the industry as a whole. It's thinking about who your specific customer base is as a reptile breeder. And then how do you create a trend that maps to those folks? So that, I think, is just, again, that's my 2 cents. Again, feel free to throw your thoughts, your comments as it relates to gene cycles, trends, how they kind of die off, come back, those flows, those cycles, how people should kind of adapt, do that. Feel free to throw that in, as well as feel free, if you got any other questions, comments, things that we want to, talk about, discuss. I know this was a concept that, a lot of people were talking about, last year. They wanted me to do an open forum where people would ask questions and all this. So you got it, and that's what I'm trying to provide you guys. But I'm not seeing the outcry and the outreach, that I was, hoping for based on, what a lot of folks were asking for last year. So, we'll see if we'll do this format, continued, going forward. Obviously, feel free to throw into the comments, other different ways that you want to maybe potentially kind of see this. But like I said, part of the reason we kind of segued to this when we couldn't get our shark breeder nailed down was, again, because of feedback and comments from viewers. So definitely let me know your thoughts. So some of the other things, that were kind of brought up here, I'm just looking down the list as far as other things that were sent, but just not as highly repetitively sent. Show tips, show scouting, overhead setup. I'm not going to touch on that too much. I think that there's a lot of really great, videos and notations and documentation already out there on that. Again, I mean, for me, I really believe that everything starts with a brand, how you position your brand, how you look at a logo, having what you call a tertiary. So that's something that I do with my brand, so that if I take the words away, people still remember the tertiary. So that's part of the reason why the snake is next to the cyber serpents, because I can take the cyber serpents away, or I can take the snake away, and I still have brand power. That's I think a key thing with shows is to try to think about that, create a symbol. Strongest brands in the world have a symbol that's recognizable, that's highly repetitive, that's highly stampable in a sense. So again, I think that that's a key piece to shows. And then I think it's appearance, consistency and appearance. Having clean, consistent, colors, tablecloths, displays, going. Think about it this way: when you go back to that marketing funnel again, here I go, going down that trend again. But my big thing goes back to how you show your brand is a reflection, to your customer as far as what you're selling. If you go as cheap as possible on your table and on your setup, what does that sell to your customer? That says, I don't care about how much time I put into my table. You could have amazing animals, but it doesn't reflect that way. So putting the time and the money into, like I said, your brand, your logo, your setup, showing that you're clean and that you're consistent. Consistency, I think, is a big thing, because that customer who walks through the show, the first time they see you, they talk to you. They go back to the next show. They see you, they talk to you a little bit more, and they remember you. They come back the third time, they see you, they talk to you, remember you, and they buy from you. And they buy from you partially because you're showing consistency. Consistency in the appearance, consistency in the product that you're producing, consistency in the quality of how everything looks. So I think that that's a really, key thing. It's not that you have to go balls to the walls with your setup, but it's about having consistency in your setup. So, for those folks who wrote in, the couple that wrote in and asked about that, I really think that that's one of the biggest tips, when it comes to, show preparation is consistency, is how things are going to be set up, how they're going to look. I got some comments coming in here to the chat. Just people talking back and forth. Nothing too crazy here right now. And then, let's see some of the other ones that people are throwing out here. Future hot projects. I mean, that one I'm not going to talk about, obviously, my projects. Again, like I've always told people, this is more your channel than it is mine. So for me to talk about hot projects and stuff, that's not something that I think is fair without a guess, because it's very subjective, from that perspective. Setup and overhead is the other one I'm seeing here. And I think that's just, something, being able to forecast, how much you're going to be potentially producing this year, how much of that is going to be moved, in person at a show. So what does that mean from either, deli cup containers or snake bags to then be able to send them off to a new home, or other preparatory things like that. If you're shipping online, what does that mean for your breakdown for boxes? What does that mean for your breakdown for things like bedding, like ReptiChip? What does that mean for things like your deli cups and your racks, if you use rack systems? So, when it comes to setup and overhead, realistically, I kind of tell people, I mean, if your setup and overhead is going to end up costing you, 50% of what your sales is, and you're already cutting your profit in half, it's not where you want to be. So thinking about how you can be efficient about that overhead and sales, there's definitely multiple ways, to be able to do that. For me, I always tell people a good rule of thumb is to try to be no more than 33% overhead. That's, for me, that's part of the reason why I try to consistently, my goal is always to have a $500 animal or more on my table and try to reduce as many low volume animals. And those low priced animals are really more for trying to get new folks into the hobby, get kids into the hobby, those types of perspectives. But from the business side, that's why that 33% mark really becomes key if you want to be able to keep doing your hobby profitability of your hobby. That becomes a big thing. I appreciate that, Will. I don't know if my acid stuff too hot. It's actually a funny thing. I was told this weekend at a show that my acid stuff was shit. So I don't know how hot it is anymore. I thought it was cool when it came out of the egg, but apparently, according to other breeders and stuff, it's a little behind the times. So hopefully we'll be having some better stuff here next year. We should hopefully have some acid Krypton stuff and some acid Krypton het DG type stuff. So fingers crossed for some better days ahead for the acid project. But I mean, I'm going to throw it out there. I mean, we've hit the hour here. I feel, incredibly bad, obviously, for most of the folks who did join live and stuff. I mean, I was hoping we'd have more interaction, for this open forum. Obviously, open forums don't work if you don't have a lot of people. I thought, kind of given the feedback from last year, that would work when we weren't able to nail down a shark breeder for Shark Week. Obviously, it didn't. So folks who watch afterwards, hopefully some of the information is helpful for your reptile breeding business, for your reptiles, just kind of concepts in the hobbies. Hopefully that helps. If it's incredibly boring, I apologize. From my perspective, obviously going into week 2, we do, obviously are going back to our typical format with breeders, interviewing with breeders. So we've got Marcus Wolf. So if you don't know him, he's one of the real high-end boutique breeders here in the Chicagoland industry. Does a lot of DG and Krypton stuff. He's going to be on next week, followed up by Jason Amos right before Schaumburg. They're both going to be at Schaumburg vending as well. And then we're going to be live at Schaumburg. So live at Schaumburg Friday night. If you are a vendor, definitely want to be around there. That's how you're going to get your 15 minutes of fame, be able to tell people about what you brought, your thoughts, your feelings, what's got you pumped up about the industry this year, and really be able to push that out to folks. But other than that, like I said, we'll be driving forward here this season. Appreciate the folks who did stop in and say hi. Hopefully that there was some information here that was helpful. Otherwise, tune in next week for Marcus Wolf and myself, and we'll get back to our regular scheduled programs here. For those who tuned in, thank you. I am Nick Karskevich with The Tread. This was our Season 2 Open Forum. Talk to you next week.